our COBT viewers and listeners, it's Maynard, Mike, and Arjun here with what will be the last COBT of 2025, and it has a great chance to be our absolute best. Today, we're going to get to talk to Bill Barr. Somewhere along the way, we were lucky enough to meet him and become a friend and connect with him and talk about the world. Bill was the Attorney General under George Bush, the first, and he was, of course, the Attorney General under Donald Trump in his first administration. And getting to know Bill, and Bill has a long history of public service and in the law. He's now a partner in the Torton Group. But in getting to know him, Bill's been involved in thinking about sanctions, international law, Congress, the power of the executive, national security, certainly all the issues that go into the Venezuela discussion right now. And of course, he lived that in the first Trump administration and was involved in some of those policies, led them in that first administration. So, Bill, I've gone on too long. We're delighted to have you and delighted to have you as a friend and just so excited to talk to you today about all these issues.
I'm delighted to be with you, Maynard. Thanks.
Mike, before we jump in with Bill, what would you tell us about what's happening in the world? This is the last one of the year, Mike, so you got to nail this.
It's a special one, right?
It's a very special one.
Yeah, I mean, I think today what's moving markets is you had November CPI came in much lower than expected. A lot of that probably has to do with the government shutdown, but it did come in lower than expected, so it's temporarily rallying bonds and equities. I'd say two or three things that were interesting to us over the last 24, 48 hours, and that's the first one is you had this PGM capacity auction. We talked about it, I believe, on Tuesday on our previous COBT, and the results came out, and you had record results, $333 per megawatt per day, which compares to 2024, 2025 capacity auction around $30 a megawatt per day, so a tenfold increase. Now, as bad as that sounds, what's even more frightening is that there wasn't enough capacity put into the auction. It looks like they're going to be 6 to 7 gigawatts short, so that is a big problem. And so you're just going to see prices, the next time we have the auction, they're going to be higher. We're going to have to find ways to incentivize that additional capacity to come on, but that was pretty frightening, to say the least. The other set of news that came out just the last 24 hours is, BP. In Woodside, Meg O'Neill, who is the CEO of Woodside Energy, is now going to become the new CEO of BP. We wish Meg well. This is probably going to be it's going to be a tough job, but I think she can handle it. But that is a big news in the oil major land. We're not going to really talk too much about oil prices. Look, oil prices down $56, $57 a barrel. That's the lowest they've been since 2021. At these prices, at the $55, $56 strip, you are just not going to see budgets up next year. You're going to see budgets flat to down next year. We're going to hear about those in the next 1 or 2 months, so expect that's going to happen. And sort of a lead in, that we have Bill on the show, we're going to talk about Venezuela. I want to throw some facts out about Venezuela over the last 10, 15 years. Venezuela was the only non-Mideast country who was one of the five founding OPEC members in 1960. The others were Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia. Venezuela's peak oil production was in December of 1970 at 3.75 million barrels per day, and it troughed in September of 2020 at roughly 300,000 barrels per day. When Hugo Chavez became president in February 1999, oil production was 2.8 million barrels per day. When Maduro became president in March of 2013, oil production was roughly 2.4 million barrels a day. So down about 400,000 barrels a day under the Chavez regime. Today, Venezuela's oil production is roughly 950,000 barrels a day. So roughly 1.5 million barrels a day lower under the Maduro regime. So a real economic disaster. And I started thinking about this. I mean, if you think about the economic damage that's been basically enacted here under Maduro, and you take the 1.5 million barrels per day, you throw an average of $60 per barrel, you're talking about $30 to $40 billion a year of revenue that has been lost because of these oil policies. And that's a country that has $100 to $110 billion in GDP. So you're talking 30 to 40% of their GDP has gone because of these policies. Finally, to kind of wrap it, Venezuela's oil production obviously is 950,000 barrels a day. Their neighboring country, Guyana, literally had no production 5 years ago. Today, they're around 650,000 barrels a day. And by 2030, they're projected to be 1.3 to 1.5 million barrels a day. And so it just shows you like what good policy and what bad policy and and being in partnership with like really, really good oil majors will get you. So with that, Major, we'll hand it over to you.
Good stuff, Mike. Arjun, Venezuela is obviously something you've talked about and thought about forever, but let me just throw it open to you, whatever you'd add as we jump in.
I might just build upon what Mike just mentioned about Venezuela and harken back to the early part of my career, which were some happier days for both the country and its oil industry. So if you'll recall PDVSA, this was an outgrowth of the original companies that were in Venezuela. I believe it was Chevron, Mobil, and Exxon. I may be off on the trio, but they formed what became known as PDVSA, Petróleos de Venezuela. And in the 1990s, they had a great opening where these major oil companies came in, they partnered to develop the oil reserves there. These are very heavy oil. But unlike Canada, where you have to heat the reservoir and do all these sort of steam-assisted gravity drainage and so forth, these wells with horizontal drilling, they cold flow, meaning you don't have to heat up the reservoir at several thousand barrels per day per well. Maynard, that is a dream scenario for the kind of resource that you get exposed to in Venezuela. Massive oil resource, arguably one of the largest, if not the largest, untapped resources in the world, or lightly tapped at this point in time. We then took that heavy oil, and because heavy oil doesn't easily turn into gasoline or these kind of things, they got shipped to the U.S. Gulf Coast, where the refiners that were partnered with Venezuela, the refining arms of the integrated oils, processed that oil. And so it was a really great collaboration. The fiscal terms by the standards of OPEC countries were reasonably favorable. My memory is 1/6 royalty and a 33% tax rate that was raised a little bit over the subsequent years, but generally favorable fiscal terms and a real true partnership. And over that time period, Venezuela production rose to those kind of heights that Mike had mentioned under President Chavez. I think they want to say they rose by about 1.5 million barrels a day over the 1990s. And so I will simply say it is sad. It is devastating what's happened to the country. It is obviously more than just oil policy that has gone wrong, though that was the starting point when Chavez came in, started toughening the contract terms, and then ultimately ended up nationalizing a bunch of the fields out there. So I will simply say that I don't know what is right for Venezuela as a country. I'm not Venezuelan. All I can say is what is right can't be what's happened over the last 25 years. And I will at least hope and pray for them that we get back to the better times. Whether that means partnering with foreign companies or not, I don't know. But this is a country that has a tremendous wealth of oil resources. It is a natural partner to the United States under a different form of government or system. And I can only hope that we'll get back to some semblance of that in the future. And I think, Maynard, with that, we'll turn it over to you and our great guest today.
Awesome. Well, Bill, we really are so excited to talk to you about this. It's to say it's timely doesn't capture it, because who knows what's happening as we're speaking. But the stat I saw that grabbed me, Bill, was that this is the largest buildup of military force in the Caribbean since the Cuban Missile Crisis. I don't know if that's right, but we clearly have a ton of military capability building up there. Just as a lead-in, how are you watching this? How are you thinking about this? Does this surprise you where we've gotten to in a really quick order?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't surprise me. It pleases me actually to see the president taking on this challenge. The way I come at it, I started with the view that, and this was back during the first Trump term, that we had to address drug cartels as national security issues. They are narco-terrorist groups. They operate in Mexico as a state within the state, either with the complicity or the tolerance of the government. And I felt the only way under the circumstances we can deal with them, and I think it is appropriate to deal with them as a national security threat, which means ultimately we cannot use case-by-case prosecution that we would use in domestic law enforcement to deal with this problem. We had to use all our tools of national defense, including the military, intelligence, and so forth. I view Venezuela, I come at it from the standpoint that not primarily, but initially, they fall into the same category because of their drug activities. This is a regime we do not recognize. They have suppressed the democratic results of their elections. They have taken their country's GDP, not just the oil, but I mean, virtually every sector has been destroyed and collapsed. Their GDP has just been in free fall. A quarter of the country are refugees that have left, many of them in refugee camps in Colombia and Brazil and so forth. It is a humanitarian crisis, and this used to be the pearl of South America, the richest, most prosperous, biggest middle class, and so forth. But it's not just drugs with Venezuela. Venezuela is a strategic adversary and a danger to the United States. They are a base for Hezbollah. They support Hezbollah. They're in all kinds of deals, money laundering and other deals, to help Hezbollah to facilitate drug trafficking into the United States. They have served to facilitate the cocaine traffic into the United States by as a bridge between the Mexican cartels and the Colombians and so forth. And they themselves are directly involved in the trafficking into the United States. So in 2020, we indicted Maduro when I was Attorney General, and 14 of his lieutenants. They have a cartel, as you know, called the Cartel of the Sun, and they are attempting to poison the United States. That is, they view them as flooding the United States with drugs, and we alleged when we indicted them, based on evidence that we had, that this is not just money making. This was a plan to weaken the United States by their drug activity. So they're a hostile country. They pose a threat to the United States, and I think that we're right in using military force if we have to defend ourselves against this. And I also think there's a big humanitarian dimension to this. In the long run, this is a lot of parallels with Panama, I would say, where I was involved with that under President Bush, H.W. Bush. This is an illicit regime, and I think we can stop the human suffering and defend our interests if we oust the regime.
I was wondering, Bill, this term narco-terrorist, maybe we talked about Noriega like that, but it does seem to be somewhat new, or it's a new concept or something we haven't talked about as much.
Yeah.
Do you mind defining that for us,
Yeah,
or how should we think about that?
Right. This is not like the mafia. This is not like organized crime in the United States, at least as organized crime had historically been. These are increasingly paramilitary organizations with heavy weapons, with armored cars, with militia units, and they actually control territory. They are states within a state. They can stand toe to toe. I'm talking now Mexico, but the same obviously is true in Venezuela, where they involve the regular military. But the way they keep power, and the way they take power, and the way they cow, for example, the Mexican government, is through terror. I mean, they call it, silver or lead. You either play ball with us or you're going to get killed. So if someone tries to enforce the law against them, their families are killed. So they use terror to seize power, to control territory, and to use that territory as a safe haven to conduct predatory activity against the United States.
And so this thing about this term or this category, it's not that and you'll correct me if I have this wrong, but it's not that you're just selling drugs to fund the organization. You're selling drugs with the intent of doing harm, like the drug is a weapon
Right.
against the country.
Yes. We specifically alleged in our indictment, and when I say alleged, I mean based on evidence that we had that we felt we could prove when we indicted them, based on information we had, that they were specifically doing it, quote, to flood the United States and to weaken the United States politically. So this is ideological. Yes, they make money. Yes, they want to make money. Yes, they have their foreign bank accounts, but it's also ideological.
And do you think, Bill, you look at this situation, and I think for those of us who are around the energy industry, particularly around oil, you're acquainted with the Chavez and the humanitarian side of this.
Mhm.
And then somehow this has gone from being a, socialist communist government that became a bit of a dictatorship. It's drifted into, let's be friends with the Russians, let's be friends with the Chinese, let's be friends with the Cubans, the Hezbollah, the
Yeah.
fact that you have a friend of, this is really, I think that I'll kind of speak for the average person on the street. It's this Chinese, Russian, Cuban, Hezbollah, Iran, the fact that they're into all this, that's where it leaves the road.
Yep.
It's not just when George W. Bush, I remember he'd go down for the summit meetings or things, and it was always a big deal that he and Chavez wouldn't talk. But then it was mild compared to
Mhm.
where we are now.
Yeah, it's certainly gotten worse. I mean, they do have Russian military assets down there, the missile defenses and stuff down there, and they, against air defense systems and so forth. I believe the Chinese have a base of operations there, and obviously are benefiting a lot from the oil. They're getting the oil from Venezuela and Hezbollah, which I think the Secretary of State Rubio said this is their anchor in our hemisphere, and it is. That's their base.
Do you think, Bill, this is maybe a slightly unfair question, but the U.S. For a long time, I don't know, Grenada, Panama, uh, Kuwait, Iraq, for 20 plus years, maybe from 80 to 2010, we as a country were used to when we're threatened, we may have to go in.
Yeah.
And the experience with Iraq and Afghanistan was hard. And I guess what I'm asking is, do you think our adversaries decided that they could engage in all this kind of activity and not worry about us doing anything because we seemed like we were tired and just not going to engage in this type of stuff anymore? Is that
Yeah, I think that's exactly what happened. I mean, part of it is understandable in that our attention was seized after 9/11 with dealing with global terrorism and really focused, and the military attention was focused elsewhere and so forth. And we sort of let things drift in Latin America, and things have gotten out of hand down there. And the Chinese are all over, as you know, they're all over Central America and Latin America.
so far over this 3, 4, 5 week period, as this has escalated, we had the drug boats at first, and now we have a blockade, and the rhetoric is up. And someone has told me there's a couple of sites where you can monitor planes, and we have planes in Venezuelan airspace, but the whole thing is escalating. It does not have, it hasn't had a speech to the nation. It hasn't had a congressional sort of mandate or whatever you'd say. Like, it is all happening sort of in the executive branch. Do you mind just shedding some light on how you'd be thinking about this, or how we should understand that? Does this fit? Is it law enforcement? Is it a military operation? To help us understand that.
So there are really two sets of issues. One question is, is it appropriate for our nation to be using military force against this, these particular subjects? And the second question is, and if we are going to use military force, who within our system should be making that decision? So let me hold that second one in abeyance. You have this people are saying, well, this is illegal. This is unconstitutional to be sinking these drug boats. This is really a law enforcement matter, and you have to give them due process and so forth. And what these people, the mistake they're making is, our country, as a sovereign nation, has two types of power: to establish like all countries, to establish domestic tranquility, to keep order and peace within the body politic, within the political community. You have law enforcement powers, which are disciplinary. You discipline people who break our rules within society and prey on others. That's its genesis. Then you have to provide for the common defense. You have the power, the sovereign, to act against foreign threats, threats emanating from foreign sources. And some things could be addressed as both at our option, essentially. We pass laws against terrorism, but that doesn't mean they're not defense issues and we're free to use defense. And we've seen that. We do zap people with drones. That's the use of defense powers. We don't have to go and arrest them. And the same is true with international drug organizations and narco-terrorist stuff if they pose a national defense threat. And remember, our casualties from this are higher than the highest peak of World War II for killed in actions. We lost, at the peak of World War II, we lost 100,000 killed in action that year. And, that's how many Americans we're losing now. This is a national security problem. So that's number one. So I think, yes, it's okay to use defense rather than law enforcement. And as a practical matter, the idea that you can law enforcement works if you control the territory. Like here in the United States, you issue a subpoena, you get the evidence, you conduct a search. There are people you can question. But in a foreign country that's complicit in the activity, the idea that you can go and deal with law enforcement is ridiculous. The next question is this violate international law? Aren't we restricted in you? And there are sort of people who argue, they're called restrictionists, that say under the UN Charter, you can only use force, only if you're attacked with an armed attack. So my reaction to that is twofold. One, it depends what you call armed. I mean, these people would want to say it has to be guns and landing on the beach. But they're using, they're pumping drugs into the United States, poison, and killing people with moral certainty that they're killing people like that. I consider that using it as a weapon. So even if you say armed, I think this falls under that definition. And then you think, well, suppose a country just started using cybersecurity to destroy our infrastructure and bring us to our knees economically. That wouldn't be an attack because they're not carrying guns. I think it's a ridiculous interpretation of that UN Charter. But the second thing is the United States has never agreed to that interpretation. All the Charter says is that nothing in the Charter prevents a country from defending itself against armed attack. It doesn't say that's the only time you can defend your country. And, we have always taken the position in the United States that we can use force to protect our vital national interests. The other thing here is there's a doctrine called unable or unwilling. And that is a doctrine we've used since the very early days of the Republic, which is if there's a threat in territory, foreign territory, that another country claims is their sovereign territory, but they're not doing anything about it. They're allowing predations, Pancho Villa coming across the border, Seminole raids into Georgia, Barbary pirates attacking American ships, and the sovereign's not doing anything about it. We can act. Now, Obama used that in Syria. That was the basis. The unwilling or unable doctrine was his basis for putting troops into Syria. But we have done this since the inception of the Republic. And this is the classic example. You have these heavily armed, violent gangs, criminal organizations holding territory, acting like the sovereign, operating out of Mexico, operating out of Venezuela. What do? We just sit there and take it? No.
Unable and unwilling. That sounds like what happens when I tell my kids to do chores around the house, but we'll just leave that there.
Right.
Yeah, Bill, one of the things that comes across to me is the way you explain why we're doing what we're doing with Venezuela right now. It seems so obvious. Why can't the Trump administration really lay this out? It seems like they're making it too difficult. You laid it out pretty simplistically, so that's question number one. And question number two is, be aware of what you want. I mean, if Maduro falls and leaves, I mean, typically things don't lead to the better overnight. Things get typically substantially worse. Maybe talk about, just what your thoughts about on that legally, what can we do? How does this unfold if, say, something happens next week, next month?
Well, first, I agree with you. I think it's very important in a republic like ours to explain things to the American people, and I'd like to see more time taken explaining things because I think the case is very, very strong. I think people viscerally feel it that this makes sense. I have seen polls saying the American people favor using the military against the cartels. I think that's the innate good sense of the American people. But it would be good if the administration spent a little time explaining things. I also believe and agree that one of the things you have to be cautious about is what if you break it, it's yours. You go in there and then you own the problem. And I think we have to be cautious in general about that. I served under President H.W. Bush when he stopped. After Gulf One, when we demolished the Iraqi army, he stopped because we had achieved our objectives, and he didn't want to get into Iraq at that point. Now on Panama, okay, 26,000. We indicted Noriega, and he was futzing around, just not honoring his treaty obligations, and 26,000 troops down there. It took a couple of weeks. When they realized the Americans were there, those that could get out, his allies that could get out, got out because they wanted to protect the bank accounts they had in Switzerland and Spain and other places. And we had a government that we recognized and swore in the night of the invasion that was pro-American. So I think that worked out. That worked out okay. Now, I don't have. I leave it to the experts in the administration to figure this out. But my own belief is that there is massive opposition to the current regime. I think what we know about the last election that was held, that it was decisively against Maduro. And I think there are some good leaders that could take power as interim governments. And we may be in a situation where there's some resistance, but I think that the leadership, Maduro and those around him, will either be prosecuted and end up like Noriega, rotting in jail, or more likely they will skedaddle as soon as they realize we're serious and the Americans are coming in, and that's their choice: rotting in American prison or seeking sanctuary in a place like Spain and enjoying their bank accounts.
I'm going to, before I ask a question, fact check myself in real time that the three companies that were nationalized in 1976 were Exxon, Mobil, which was a second company, separate at the time, and Royal Dutch Shell. I think I said Chevron. It should have been Exxon, Shell, and Mobil created what became PDVSA. That was the first nationalization. The second one happened under Chavez in the 2000s. But Mr. Barr, I want to follow up on this idea of going after the drug trade, which I think, when I think of President Trump, I think he's very clear on his immigration views, and by all accounts, is living up to what he said he wanted to do. And I think he's also been very vocal about the drug trade as well. And you've articulated very clearly how Venezuela fits into that. I think the average person would have said maybe it's different countries that we would have thought were more impactful on the drug trade, perhaps Mexico, different countries in South America. It does feel like, I think, to many people, while President Trump was clear about being against drug trade, maybe Venezuela felt like a kind of a surprise country to suddenly go after. It leads to speculation that Secretary Rubio, who by all accounts has been a strong and good Secretary of State, maybe more the driver here, given his Cuban heritage. I'm wondering if you could speak to that, and maybe why not other countries as part of this? Why Venezuela right now?
Well, I think Venezuela has been a problem for a long time on the drug front. It's just that most people aren't familiar with it because it hasn't been given the profile that, for example, Mexico has. But go back to 2020, we indicted Maduro and 14 other leaders of that country with a very detailed indictment explaining their role in the drug trade, flying their planes up into Central America, unloading them, cocaine into the United States, and facilitating cocaine and the trafficking of cocaine from Colombia and then being shipped up from Mexico. So they've been playing a role in this for a long time. they are in a different position than Mexico, because Mexico has a government that we recognize and at least claims to be opposed to the cartels. I don't believe they are. I believe they're co-opted or cowed by them. But the fact is, it is a government we recognize and are dealing with. Venezuela is different. They have no government we recognize, and we believe that the people so-called running the country have no official standing. So, it's sort of the first part of this. In my opinion, it's sort of the best place to start trying to reassert some law and order in the northern part of Latin America and Central America. Now, we have some good, pro-American governments taking shape in Latin America generally. The election in Chile, Argentinians are certainly friendly. El Salvador leader is someone we can work with and so forth. And I think Venezuela has become the base, as you were pointing out, of sort of all the misfits or the axis of evil, essentially, all those countries. That's their ally. That's their base.
Bill, what do you make of the the Russian involvement? As I recall, in the Trump administration last time around, there was almost a deal to get Maduro out, and Putin intervened and convinced him not to acquiesce or whatever exactly was going to happen.
Right.
And now, of course, we still have now the Maduro problem is worse, and the Russians obviously are in Ukraine. So the presence of the Russians, this being a Russian ally, like, what do you make of that in terms of the signaling, the threat, the implications? Like, how do you factor in that piece of the puzzle?
Well, I think Putin would always want and always try to act to support the idea that he has outposts in our hemisphere that allow him to tweak us and threaten us and, raise our concerns and show also some counter pressure when he doesn't like something we're doing over, in his neighborhood. So he's gonna try to keep that going. However, he's very much constrained right now because he has to focus on Ukraine and NATO and so forth. And so his room to maneuver and to actually take on the United States is very limited. So I think he will make noise, but at the end of the day, the Russians cannot stop us from imposing our will in Venezuela.
Do you think it? We saw an interesting pivot with Syria, which had been a Russian ally. The Iranians, we bombed Iran. That's a Russian ally.
Mm-hmm.
Now you have third Russian ally is on our radar. Is this part of a bigger plan of reducing Russian influence, because it sort of feels like Putin is weak and we're slowly leaning on countries that were his friends.
To the extent I think the initiative is not necessarily to do that, but I think it's actually more China that is of concern in the long term. I think we should view them as the long term danger down there in South America, not Russia. Not that Russia isn't a problem, but the Chinese are a much more substantial problem. They've been trying to get ports down there, naval ports. In Latin America, they are all over the place with their investment, and they're trying to build influence. And Venezuela is one of their biggest partners down there.
Maybe we could jump back to one which has a few legal issues in it, or it's part of the international law, which is the tankers, and these tankers that we've already sanctioned, and now we're going to up the ante and start seizing them. Do you mind talking about that?
Yeah. So actually, people might remember that in I think it was 2020, beginning of 2020, first part of it, we seized oil from 4 tankers, Iranian-related tankers. We didn't have to board them. We sort of induced them to stop in U.S. ports, and we took the oil out. And, there was a lot of hand wringing about that at the time. So we've been after, this ghost fleet and the trade in sanctioned oil and sanctioned ships and so forth for a while. And I think the president's putting teeth back in that. And I think obviously it's going to really squeeze Venezuela, which at this stage, given our objectives, makes sense. I'm always concerned when you use a sort of a slow strategy like this, as opposed to just dealing with the problem, because a lot of innocent people suffer from it over time. So, there's been this move to, rely more and more on sanctions and punishments and so forth to avoid actual use of military. But sometimes using military is the more humane way of dealing with it, and many fewer innocent people suffer.
Do you mind just talking about a blockade? Because that is a sort of a fascinating feature of military history. That we're using that word again. I guess we're not letting any cargoes get in and out that are sanctioned boats or oil like that. Have you thought? I'm sure you must have been around blockade as a solution and what are the issues. It's a fascinating thing.
Right. So, I mean, well, this is not really a full blockade. This is targeting sanctioned ships and sanctioned oil moving. So but obviously that is, very precious cargo that is very important economically to Venezuela. But it's a tool. It's a way of using military dominance or power to achieve your political objective without actually shooting people or bombing people. The risks, obviously, are if you're opposed to a country that has the force to shoot at our ships and so forth. So,
Do you think if this escalates, because I saw one commentator making the observation that the odds of us going up are now really high. The odds of us going in are now really high, partly because once you put this much force in that position, we're kind of getting in a position that it's hard to back down.
yeah.
Who knows? But my question is, if we're going in, does that require how should the president think about that as a legally and constitutionally? What is your advice or observation around that next decision?
Well, the line between where you need congressional authority to use force to deal with a foreign threat is murky, and it's been debated, for 200 years. So in the first Gulf War, the president deployed over 600,000 American troops on the border there. A similar situation, a huge buildup. There was no doubt in my mind we were going to go in, and the president asked me, did he need congressional authorization to do that? And I explained why I didn't think he did. But we also said, you can win the vote on the Hill, so why don't you go up and get it, because that'll make it easy for you. But that was to me a much bigger confrontation of the type you would think of as an all-out war than I think this would be. H.W. Bush didn't get congressional approval to go into Panama. He moved with 26,000 troops.
So you also, in your background, you were at the CIA as well. You've been around national security all your life. Targeted missions where, because I think maybe one distillation of this is you have a illegitimate government. It is a cadre of people who are up to no good and breaking laws and threatening the country. There's just an argument to be made that we need to swoop in and take that group of people. Doesn't have to be a war. What are the legalities or the thought process around that? Because more often than not, we think about going in and you've got huge force, but really the problem is a smaller group of people. what kind of options do you have to try to just deal with these individuals?
Well, I mean, we're getting increasingly able to do surgical kinds of things. And when you look at Syria, very few Americans were killed in our Syria operations, but a lot of ISIS were killed. So we're getting much better at being precision. The question in Venezuela is how much actual support is going to go out on the street, be shooting, engaging with American troops and so forth. If they see the situation as foreordained as to what the result is going to be, that's really the issue as to how messy it would get. I've seen people suggest that, and I think there's some merit in it, that if you're responding to a particular threat, like a group that's smuggling drugs and stuff, and you're going after dealing with them, and it is doesn't have substantial risk of turning into a major war, that's the kind of action that the president can use his defense powers as commander in chief. And I think this falls more into that bailiwick. I might be wrong, but I don't think it would erupt into a major war. And I think probably what's going on, and I don't know, but I think probably there's a lot of intelligence collection going on, and there's going to be sequential taking, things on, targeting certain activities of theirs, like the boats and perhaps other things. And at some point, I think there'll be decisive action taken. Probably we'll be negotiating during this period to see if they have any interest of getting out.
So one more from me, and Mike and Arjun jump back in, which is perversely, if you're Maduro, what would be the move you should make right now to head this up? Like what option would he have to get out with as little pain as possible here?
I think he would probably be offered the deal of getting out, and
like him and his guys and some money, go to another country, and then
they have the money. They have the money,
and presumably Machado comes in as the previously elected president. And
right now, for all the people who are talking about international law, this again harkens back to Panama. Our law is very clear that it's the president who decides who the legitimate government of a country is. The president recognizes a government. So what we did in Panama was the guy who Noriega suppressed, that is the guy who actually won the election, and Dara, he was taken onto an American military base the night of the operation. He was sworn in as the president. The president, Bush, recognized him as the legitimate government, and he asked for us to help restore order in Panama. So that's all well within the president's authority to do. And I could see a similar situation here, where the president would recognize somebody as the legitimate government.
Yeah, Bill, I see. One of the concerns I see with Trump right now is he kind of boxed himself in by campaigning on, I don't want to go and make new wars and stuff of that nature. And so it kind of maybe gets him in a little bit of a trouble with his constituency and his voters if he does do this. Now, I agree with you. I mean, I'm from Panama. I basically understood how that fell out, and I knew it was going to last no more than a couple weeks. I think the same is going to be said here. I do think he's sort of a paper tiger. I do think the people want him gone. And so I do think that if you're going to act, you got to act swiftly. And so from that standpoint, how much do you agree with that? And, what then?
I agree with that. My own general view. I mean, you have to be prudent and do smart things. But at the end of the day, I think getting bogged down in, extended blockades and tightening the pressure and creating these incentives and that incentives, I think that's where you get into trouble. I think if you have the ability to go in and do it in shorter order, then at the end of the day, it's the most effective way to do it. And it's the least costly, and especially for innocent people, innocent citizens of Venezuela, than an extended thing. So I'm thinking that what's happening now is really just sort of positioning, getting more information, tightening the screws. But I hope it doesn't turn into a big extended campaign.
Yeah, and I think that's right. And I think, I guess my next question would be, if he does go in and if he does have success and if we do change the government, and, we're talking about not the next 30 days, but the next 2 to 3 years, what type of message does that send to Mexico and some of these other countries that, look, you better stay in line or, you might be next?
I think it sends a really important message to Mexico, because I think the Mexican government, is riding a tiger. I've said that country is in the grip of a python that they can't deal with. They do not have the wherewithal. Even if they wanted to get rid of the cartels, they couldn't do it without our help. And we don't want gringo down here, and they use that actually to rally support. But I think it's time to get tough with the Mexicans. We cannot protect our people with a narco state on our border. And I've seen it again and again down there. Those governments are either corrupt or they're completely intimidated and afraid to act. And I think you have to if you want them to come along. I have this in my memoir. This was the position I took down there when I was in office, which is, if they know we're going to come in, and I think our message to them is going to be, if you don't deal with them, we will, and you need our help, and we're going to come in and deal with it. You're either with us or against us. They will be with us. We will do it with their cooperation, but they have to know we're going to do it. And I think this will set the stage for that, in my own view.
Just wanted to follow up a bit on Maynard's question about what comes next, and maybe how much confidence, I don't think certainty could ever be used about what does come next, whether it's the lady who won the Nobel Prize or so forth, or one of Maduro's cronies. I think we focus so much on Maduro. The folks that benefit from the illegal drug trade that you've clearly articulated, as well as at times illegal oil trade, it's not just one person. And
Right.
the ability to kind of get out not just Maduro and give him safe passage if we don't want it to be a more dramatic war. I don't think it's just one person. How can you offer insight in how we can think about really cleaning out the entirety of those folks, and how easy or not easy that is to get this, quote, better government that supposedly gives Venezuela a better chance?
Well, I hope that's some of the planning that's going on now, and I think that can explain some of the deliberation, that we're moving deliberately, which is planning on exactly who are people that we can trust and support, and who are people that would have to leave. And hopefully that work is being done. I mean, a lot of that was done in Panama. A lot of we knew when we had lists of the PDF people, and who were the bad guys and who were the good guys. So Panamanian Defense Force. But so I hope that kind of planning is going on now.
Mike alluded to President Trump talking about no more foreign wars, this kind of stuff. But there's also this notion of spheres of influence. There was the Monroe Doctrine from a long time ago, and we now you've articulated well, all the folks who should not be in Venezuela, our neighbor, that are now there. Mm-hmm. We've got a war going on between Russia and Ukraine, which I suppose from Russia's perspective, they're trying to figure out their defense against NATO. We have China contemplating potentially how they're thinking about Taiwan. I'm not trying to over-speculate about the relationship between any of these three actual or potential conflicts, but do you buy into this notion of we want to, as a country, or President Trump wants to reassert some notion of spheres of influence, and it might tie into what's going on in Russia, Ukraine, and potentially China, Taiwan?
I can't speak exactly what his strategic vision is. I certainly believe that I believe that the Monroe Doctrine should continue to be part of American strategic policy, and that I think generally that's the feeling of this administration, that we don't want our adversaries to be mucking about, within easy striking distance of the United States. It also plays into the China thing. They came very close to getting a big naval port in El Salvador before the current president Bukele won the election. And when the socialist government was in power, you go back in the 1930s, and I mean, if the Japanese Navy had established itself over in our hemisphere and could have cut off Australia and so forth, I mean, it completely changes the calculus in the Pacific. And the Chinese, that's why the Chinese are all over Latin America right now. They want to control both coasts of the Pacific, at least into Latin American side. So it's geopolitically very important that that we become more assertive down there, because we've sat back and we allowed a lot of stuff to get out of control, and it's time to be looking at Latin America.
I was wondering, Bill, we in the upfront, Mike reminded us all of some of the production numbers, and those of us in energy know Venezuela to be, an important oil market participant. But as we've gone through the logic of what the issues are here, the humanitarian crisis, a government that refuses to recognize the last election, the drugs, the criminal behavior. We've gone through many reasons, the Chinese, the Russians, we've gone through many reasons why the US should get involved here. And we have not talked about oil.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I'm raising that because you see that in the popular press as a speculation that, and the president has referenced the nationalization and such like that. But
Yeah.
I guess I was just going to ask you, from someone who's been on the inside and someone who understands all these things, this is not about oil, is it?
No, I don't think the United States is doing this because of oil. And I think, you always find a lot of progressives, saying that whenever the United States does something, it's for, the lust for oil or what have you. I don't think that's the case. We have all the oil. The United States has all the oil we need, and we have enough oil and gas to support our allies too. But I do think one of the good consequences of taking the stand that the president is that it does affect oil in our strategic interest, because the Chinese get most of that oil. And also, I think it's good to send a message about nationalization. We make a lot of investment to develop the oil resources of that to the benefit of the Venezuelan people. The Venezuelans their GDP was, I think, the highest per capita in Latin America because of the investments that we were making there. And if you take our property, you're not going to hold it indefinitely.
I wonder too, Bill, we were visiting with folks here over the last month, and they were commenting that this administration, this version of the Trump administration, has taken a lot of the learnings of the previous experience as they've tried to enact various policies.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think there's a particular learning from the first administration, the first go around, that Trump and his cabinet are applying here? Was there a takeaway? Like, for instance, does he regret not doing it the first time? I know that's hard for you to answer, but is there some learning that's coming up here?
I don't think so much learning. I think that one of the incidents that I'll always remember is that when we were discussing the problems in the drug area in Latin America, and the cartels and Venezuela and so forth, but we were focusing more on the cartels at that point. He said, "Look, I became president not to kick the can down the road for tough issues, and the fight on the drug front is a really tough issue, and I'm not going to." If we're not going to really try to take some decisive action, who's going to do it? And, I felt for a long time, yes, we can arrest people here in the United States, but when we go after the head of the snake and right to the source, that's where we have been able to make real progress. And when we did that in the Colombia in 1990s, and we worked closely with the Colombians, we destroyed the Medellin cartel and the Cali cartel because we were able to get to the head of the snake. And we have to go back to that. That was stopped under the Clinton administration. They pulled back from foreign engagement. And that's where to do it. That is where to stop the problem. It's at the source. And I think he has that, in mind. And I think he also has this view that he's been elected to take on really tough problems.
Arjun also referenced, obviously the president, Arjun said it well, campaigned on certain views around the border and illegal immigration, and that does seem to be that was an ingredient here. I mean, you referenced obviously the Venezuela has exported people all over, but a lot of them have come here, and for a while it certainly seemed like we were letting in a lot of their undesirable people. How much does the immigration discussion show up in this, what is a national security concern?
Well, I don't know because I haven't been in those, but I think you hit the nail right on the head. This is a very important consideration in my mind, which is we've gotten ourselves into this state of mind that some, corrupt, lawless group comes into power in a country, as they did in Syria with ISIS, for example, and you get a lot of refugees. And then what? And then the people, oh, you have to let all these refugees in because they're these troublemakers in their country. And I think part of our thinking back in Syria, and I think the President Trump said this at the time, which is, the answer to this is to protect those people in their own country, not just throw up your hands and have everyone leave the country and come to the United States. And I think the same thing is true in Venezuela. It's ridiculous. You have this autocrat, corrupt as hell, suppress democracy, run the country like it's his personal piggy bank. You have a quarter of the country leaving, and where are they all going to come? In the United States because they're refugees? I think you deal with the problem. They deserve their country back.
All right, I got one more, and Mike touched on it. Again, thank you so much for spending this time with us, Bill. But let's maybe think in 3 months time frame, which is let's be optimistic. Somehow this resolves through some, and let's say it includes some sort of use of force, and we resolve this situation, and a new government is installed, and many of these bad things stop happening, and we're kind of 3 months down the road. What are the collateral benefits if this goes well? I'm being optimistic. It's the holidays. If this goes well, 3 months down the road, what are the collateral benefits to the U.S. doing this?
Well,
in any context.
Well, I think it'll help stabilize the situation down there. I think it'll make the Mexicans a lot more sober about their responsibilities down there to deal with these groups. I think it'll sober up this Colombian government that is a far cry from the Colombians that we had to deal with before, who, were very courageous in standing up to the cartels. And I think ultimately it will help with a trend that I see developing in Latin America to, be allied with the United States, embrace, our free market system, and stop playing footsies with the likes of Hezbollah and the Chinese Communist Party. And so I think it'll be a big step in the right direction.
Do you think it helps?
But the main beneficiaries right off the bat will be the Venezuelan people and all those Venezuelans, 7 million or something like that are sitting in refugee camps.
Do you think it affects the Ukraine conversation with the Russians?
Well, the Russians will say, well, we're doing is what the United States was doing, but they would say that anyway. They would say, you're not going to allow, the Russian Air Force to have bases in Mexico. And they're right about that. We're not going to allow it. But, so they'll use it as an argument for what they're doing in Ukraine.
Well, Bill, you squeezed this in into your holiday schedule. And as I said, somewhere along the way, we were lucky enough to meet you and become friends with you. So we can't thank you enough for this.
Well, my pleasure always. It's good to see you, and hope to get down to Houston pretty soon to get together.
We would love it. We'll roll out the red carpet for you. And so Merry Christmas to you and your family. Happy New Year. Thank you for everything. We really appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.